I'm Dan Franklin. I'm digital publisher at the Random House Group. Welcome to the track changes session about the changing role of editorial. We're slightly tight on time. I hope you had a biscuit in the break, but lunch is not too far off. It's going to be at 1:20 now, which gives us 35 minutes. And what we want to do is try and keep this pretty succinct and leave space for questions at the end. So we're going to leave 10, 15 minutes or so, but we're going to spend about 20 minutes talking beforehand. I just thought it would be a good idea if everyone on the panel briefly introduces themselves. So I'll hand over to Donna on my right.
Hello everyone, my name is Donna Condon and I'm Editorial Director of Harlequin UK, having joined there in January of this year, moving from Little Brown Book Group. Yes, and that's me, my succinct intro.
I'm Darren Nash, I'm Digital Publisher for Golantz at the Orion Book Group, where my primary role is curating and running the SF Gateway, a giant digital classic science fiction imprint and website and growing community.
Hi there, I'm Blaine Cook. I'm a software developer by trade, sort of most notably worked on Twitter in the early days. And I'm now running a startup called Poetica, where we're working on sort of copy editing tools.
I'm Mark Witowski, Vice President of New Practices and Technologies at Jouve, service provider to many of my esteemed colleagues. And so my role within Jouve is to really watch the market, listen to customers, and listen to end users, and bring new services and products to market.
My name is Pablo Defendini. I'm currently a product manager at Safari Books Online, but I've previously held jobs being the showrunner at Tor.com, which is a community site for science fiction and fantasy fans, as well as a product manager at Open Road Integrated Media, which is a startup founded by Jane Friedman, who's formerly of HarperCollins.
Great, thanks everyone. So what I thought it'd be good to do would be to split the session in two to start with before we have questions. Basically, we'll spend about 10 or so minutes talking about commissioning and curation, sort of broader editorial topics, and then move on to how digital has changed working processes within editorial. So question for the whole panel to start us off. And this is, I guess, from a trade perspective, but we could also bring in academia and anything else you think relevant. How has the mainstream adoption of ebooks and digital reading changed the way that we're commissioning books now? Donna, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, well, I think, it has changed things dramatically, really, in terms of how editors actually think now. In the past, certainly when I first started in publishing, it was about the book. Now it's about the story, and how format plays into that is increasingly the conversation that's being had now as part of that acquisition process. In the past, as an editor, you looked at the book, you said, it was great, it's commercial, we can do it, let's do it. Whereas now, at the very first step, you're talking about platform with the same importance as the quality of the text, actually. So that all needs to happen at the very, very beginning. I think other things that have changed in a positive, for me certainly, as a lover of more diverse kind of cross-genre fiction and slightly more niche fiction, is the ability now as an editor to really take more risks with the type of content that you're actually publishing. So there now is actually that forum in a digital first capacity to A, do things that are more niche, and B, just take risks as well. Also test the market. If you have an idea for a new kind of mashup genre or something really, really different, wild and wacky, there now actually is a quite low risk way to do it. And speed as well, the ability to be fast, because that is the key. Another thing as well is, I think another thing that's definitely changed is much more now than before, when you're assessing and at the commissioning stage, author profile is incredibly key. And obviously you have those books where really that's not, it's not maybe as important, but certainly on the very commercial trade, mass market, say fiction, for example, point of view, really editors now very much will look at that author's social footprint, see what their following is, what is their online voice like? Are they witty? Are they engaging? And that all really, really factors in. So there are a few things that I've certainly found kind of are different to a few years ago.
Okay, that's interesting. Anyone else got a strong opinion on that?
Yeah, well, one of the nice things about being second is I can say I agree with everything Donna just said. But in addition, I think I'd point out that the role of the editor hasn't just changed because of digital. It's been changing for quite some time. I mean, the days when you bought a book, edited the text, and passed it on are long gone. Editors now almost act as publishers. They've got to brief the cover, they've got to make sure the cover copy is right. In many instances, it's got to be right one way for the book. It has to be different for the feed that goes out to Amazon. It might be different still for the publisher's own website or the author's website. We need to liaise with sales, we need to liaise with marketing. All of these things gradually became added to the editor's role. It's not just suddenly, wow, there's ebooks, you've got so much more to do. I do think the progression was linear, and with the advent of digital, it's starting to look a little bit exponential, but it's still been changing for a while. And I think one of the things to take a wider view that has changed is that digital has allowed us to do a lot of different things, as Donna's pointed out, but the wider technological issue that has given rise to digital has helped us to look at new opportunities for commissioning as well. I'm thinking particularly of the rise of social media, where you have books like Secret Diary of a Call Girl, based on a blog. You have books like Shit My Dad Says, based on a successful Twitter feed. And Gollantz's deputy publishing director, Simon Spanton, has commissioned a book recently over Twitter from Mitch Benn, the comedian-songwriter, who, in one of those tweets that happens 1 million times a day, said, "Hey Twitter, I'm in London, I've got 3 hours to kill. What should I do?" And while people were saying, "Go to this museum, it's amazing, this restaurant's fantastic," Simon tweeted back and said, "You could always come to talk to us about the novel you're going to write for Gollancz." And much to his surprise and delight, Mitch tweeted back, "All right, you're on." And 30 minutes later, they were having a coffee talking about a book which is now commissioned in 2 months from publication. So it's not just ebooks, it's the wider technology that's made ebooks possible, which is also changing what we do.
So there's an interesting almost split there, really, because digital is obviously a format that we're publishing into now, which allows for, you know, a lot of speed and dynamism, but digital is also a channel through which we can broadcast and receive opportunities. I wonder if, Pablo, you could pick up on that as well, the idea of that split between format and channel. And
Definitely. For those of you who aren't familiar, Safari Books Online is in fact a subscription service for books, very much in the vein of what Rebecca Smart was pining for in the previous session. It's just we're focused on technical books, you know, so learn how to do HTML or how to write JavaScript or how to be a better Python programmer, etc. And data plays such a huge part in what we do, particularly in our relationship with publishers. We can tell you to the minute, you know, what books people are engaging with, what parts of books people are engaging with, and we can relay that information to publishers, and we can tell them, hey, look, you know, you don't seem to be very interested in this particular piece of technology, let's say, I don't know, Ruby on Rails, you know, but the books that you do have out on this subject are super popular and are very much, you know, our audience is very much engaging on it. You may want to consider acquiring some more books in that, you know, within that topic. And I think to a certain degree, you know, technology books are very particular. You can be very exact and precise about that stuff, but I think to a certain degree, you can certainly apply it to trade as well. You know, you can identify trends. You can say, oh, look, you know, these books where, I don't know, telepathic dolphins befriend a child are very, you know, popular. You may want to, you know, write a little bit more about that or acquire books like that. Maybe I'm being very facile with my examples because that was pretty lame. But, you know.
We actually published that book.
Maybe not. But yeah, you can really leverage data beyond just saying how many books have I sold, or beyond just saying, this is the hot stuff right now. You can really dive deep and really just take a look at this stuff and analyze what readers are doing with your books at a very granular level. And that can obviously lead to editorial decisions.
And I think what I find fascinating is the evolution of our industry and the evolution of the web in general. What we'll call Web 1.0 is very much a command and control. It was a push of data, of content, for the purpose of reading. We then moved into Web 2.0, which was more participatory. We had more collaboration. And that changed the way we thought about the models of publishing on the web. And we're moving now into this semantic technologies where the machines themselves are what are making these intelligent decisions. And that has driven us to make different decisions on how we acquire content, how we engage with our readers. About 10 years ago, I was an aspiring author. We wrote some technical books on a then program called K2, which turned into InDesign. And our book was a miserable failure. I mean, it was short shelf life. It was out of date very quickly. And we decided on some of our next titles to create our own independent press. And I didn't realize it at the time, but we were doing this exact same thing. We were creating content, technical content. We were pushing it. People bought it, but then it just fizzled. And it was a couple years ago we decided to engage a community. We created an environment for this technical content. And that's when people really started changing from being encouraging to say, keep doing what you're doing, to actually buying our stuff. And it was a big difference, and I didn't realize it until recently that we had been following this wave. And now we're making even different moves into how can we enrich our content, both from a data perspective, but also from a descriptive perspective.
It's interesting to sort of, I think Mark's points are really well taken, but I'm listening to all of these, and there's like this content acquisition story, and I come from the web. I mean, I started 15 years ago working on indie media, and where it was like, people will write the news, we can publish ourselves, oh my God, and everyone sort of reacted and said, that's not possible, and of course now here on Twitter, there are probably 15 journalists who are real journalists in the room, and I think that sort of, we're just commissioning these things ourselves for ourselves is sort of more the environment that I'm familiar with. And reflecting on some of the things that were said earlier, that sort of piecemeal representation of what a publisher is, being able to sort of unbundle what a publisher does is really interesting for us now, because, these sort of shit my dad says, and these sorts of people, they already have the audience, they're already publishing, they're already out there, and it's just one slice of the publishing world that's really being accessed. But I think working together in those ways is perhaps the most interesting thing that all this stuff is enabling.
So can we drill down a bit more into that? Because there seems to be an evolution in the way that people are thinking of editors, that they were before gatekeepers. And then you could also think of them as curators, so that they have an agency in putting together lists. But now I think we're touching on this. There's a sense that as well they're community managers too, within a network which exists online, and that you're publishing for a particular audience. Could we speak to your experiences in that regard, and how that role is changing, that sort of dynamic between the gatekeeper, the curator, and the community manager? I don't know if Donna and Darren, you want to start on this.
Yeah, well, part of what we wanted to achieve with SF Gateway was to build a community and have a conversation, because we realized early on...
Briefly tell everyone what, in case anyone doesn't know
so
what.
it's... we have Golantz has a series of books called the SF Masterworks, which is some 100 and something books strong. And it came about because Malcolm Edwards, at the time it was launched, realized that there were lots of really key texts, and award-winning famous books, that had drifted out of print because the market had moved on, and publishing houses had been bought by other publishing houses, and contracts had got lost and all that kind of stuff. So he decided that it was worthwhile resurrecting award-winning books and key touchstone books in the genre. But after a while, you start to publish, and you think, we've got 3 books by Robert Silverberg, for instance, who has some 84, 85 books in his back catalogue. most of those, it's simply not economical to return to print. So what we're doing is we are republishing entire backlists from classic science fiction authors where we can get them, and where we can't, we're publishing what we can get, and returning them to, well, not print, returning them to availability as ebooks. But if you do that, thus far we're closing on 2,000 titles. We launched in end of September 2011. So it's not been going long, and we've got almost 2,000 titles in print. You can publish them and say, hey, it's great, go and get them on Kindle, they're on Amazon, go and get them on the iBook store. And people will go search for the one book they remember and buy that, and then never see the other 1,999 that you've got there. So we wanted to have a community where we can just spend the entire time reminding people, this great book, that great book, this author that was a favourite when you were young, this author you've never heard of, but he or she is exactly like this writer that you favour. And just generally start a conversation and allow people to discover the books in a way they almost certainly wouldn't if they went straight to the retailers. And part of my job, which is, well, it's digital publisher, but I spend as much time on the website or the forum or Twitter trying to move conversations along, answer questions. In one instance, the community kept saying, there kept being forum posts saying, what I would really love is to have a button on the website where I could see everything. And we'd laid it out so you can go by author and then look within author for their books, or you could search by book and alphabetically you find all the books beginning with B, etc. But that clearly wasn't doing the job. And it would have taken time and more money than we had left in the budget to incorporate that into the website. So I pulled the information off our publishing system, formatted a spreadsheet, put it on the site and said, hey, here you go, here's a downloadable spreadsheet. You can filter it by pub date, author name, title. Go and have fun. And they loved it. The community said, that's exactly what I want. Now I've got a checklist. All the Arthur C. Clarke books, I can now put a little mark against on that spreadsheet, and now I know what I need to buy and what I don't. So it was very interesting going from publishing as a broadcast medium, here is our stuff, here is our content, go and buy it, to publishing as a conversation and having people come back and say, what we'd really like is this, but having the technology to say, yeah, we can do that, and responding very, very quickly.
I just wanted to bring in Pablo here just to talk about your experience at Tor as well, because it strikes me that there you have an example of a publisher which has so successfully created a community that community is then transforming the publisher back. I wonder if you could talk about that, and especially what's been going on with DRM and the means of commissioning and distribution that Tor have been doing.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the main, raison d'etre for Tor.com is precisely to facilitate the same kind of things that you're talking about, is that conversation with the fan base, and luckily for us in genre, it's a very vocal fan base, and that's both good and bad. But it's definitely a fan base that's ahead on technology. They're very much interested in adopting new technologies. So a very early outset, like 2008, I guess, this was, they were clamoring for ebooks. They were clamoring for DRM-free. They were very vocal about it, and they were letting us know, right there in the comments section of these blogs, exactly what they wanted. So it wasn't the guessing game that is often part of not only the editorial process, but the marketing strategies, the broader publishing and business strategies in the publishing world was being laid bare, and was being kind of either confirming, the biases that exist in that guessing game, or putting the lie to them, just based directly from, our audience's feedback. And it's one of the really interesting lessons that I learned from that process, is that despite the fact that you are getting this communication and this direct communication, there is still you know, it's not just simply saying, oh, look at that. We've got 5 comments here that people are telling us they want X, Y, Z. You know, let's go do X, Y, Z. You have to temper that still with your own knowledge of the market, with your own knowledge of the fan base, with your own knowledge that this is just 5 dudes or girls, you know, and that they're not necessarily representative of everybody. You know, you have to kind of temper, you know, that feedback and put it into the basket with some other with other elements that then, you know, go into your decision matrix. But it's really interesting to see how that, regardless of whether, you know, you go whole hog 100% or not, it's really interesting to see how that starts to affect your editorial process and your publishing in general. One of the things that I'm personally most proud of doing while at Tor.com was we took one of Cory Doctorow's upcoming novels, Makers, and we serialized it on the site. We broke it up. It happened to have a structure that lent itself to breaking up into, I think it was like 80 some odd pieces. And we put them up, you know, I think it was like 3 times a week we'd put something up, and it was very successful. You know, about halfway through that process, we launched, we set it up so that about halfway through that process was the actual publication date of the book. It drove sales because people were like, yeah, I could wait, you know, or I could just go out and buy the book and find out what happens. It created buzz. It was really nice. We got the art director for Tor, who's very well regarded, Irene Gallo, to commission, you know, artwork for each one of these individual pieces, and we made like a whole big, you know, system out of it. You can take all the pieces and put them together. It was very, very successful, and those kinds of experiments based on, you know, things that we were seeing as trends, we kind of tried it out to see if it would work. We got the feedback from the readers and the community, and they liked it, you know, and that kind of thing. I feel like it's the laying the groundwork for things like John Scalzi, who just serialized his latest novel as a series of ebooks sold through the iBook store and through Kindle and through other retailers, naturally, at 99 cents a pop. And, you know, I'm the first one who's been there like a rat to the feeder bar every week, you know, give me my hit on Tuesdays. And those kinds of things, you know, when you're talking about the traditional publishing process and you're talking about agents and you're talking about writers and all that stuff, maybe putting together a deal for a serialized novel is something a little complex. You know, maybe legal doesn't have the right contracts for it, or maybe, you know, the agent isn't particularly interested, or you know, a whole bunch of different factors that add a lot of friction to that process. But when you're out there online and you're kind of right in front of your fan base and right in front of your community, you can, you know, do these things very quickly at a very low cost and iterate very rapidly, just, you know, adapt to changing circumstances and see what works and what doesn't. And, you know, like Richard Nash said in the last session, just fail and fail fast and fail often. And every once in a while you'll get something that's just going to hit and you can riff off of that.
So Donna, bringing you in, and then maybe we could move on to Blaine and Mark. Just talking about being I don't know if anyone in the room here is thinking about creating a digital-only list and so on, and, you know, more to do with the sort of processes involved in that and the opportunities. If you could speak a bit about your experience of that, and then maybe Blaine and Mark could talk more about the tools that are available to editors now, which weren't around even 3 years ago.
Yeah, so my first experience of a digital first list was when I worked at Little Brown and set up the romance digital first list Piacus and Tice as part of the Piacus list, where I was senior editor. And I guess I pretty much started the ball rolling as such in, it would have been early 2011, late 2010. And very exciting time, but also incredibly stressful, because the problem with doing anything new and exciting is none of the processes exist. So literally every stage that you're at, you essentially have to think about the logistics, what will work, what won't work, but at the same time not get actually bogged down in it, because if you do, you don't have that speed that is really, really necessary. So I think, so my approach really was have as much kind of logistical stuff as possible, but then really keep pushing. just to actually be doing it. Because I think, again, going back to Richard's point about taking risks, possibly failing, maybe not failing, until often you're doing it. If it's brand new, you're not going to know if it's going to work or not. And the joy about a digital first list is, if it doesn't work, one part of it, you can change it really, really quickly. But until you see it failing, you can change it. So you need to just really, really be doing it. I think a big, important element to factor in as well is not just think, okay, ebooks exist, they're big, we need to do digital first. Having an actual plan, a strategy. So what is your list? Is it, in the case of that list, romance specific, or in the case of a new list that we soft launched at Harlequin a couple of months ago, on which we're publishing our first books next month, Karina UK, is it something kind of more for everyone? So all genres, all lengths. So you need to kind of start with that understanding of what exactly are you trying to be, because I think without that, like that central philosophy, you can get lost quite quickly while you're trying to do everything so much at the same time. So I think my biggest tips really are exactly that. Think about who are you aiming for. Think about the logistics, but don't get bogged down in them, and have speed, because I think particularly the bigger the house you're in, like I've often found that because so many people are often involved, like you can end up having lots of conversations about things, and that's all very well and good, but that means that your product actually isn't getting out there, and you're not learning from whether that product is selling or not. So just really crack on and do it, and then you can adapt accordingly.
Okay, so Blaine, could you tell us a bit about Poetica, your new venture, and maybe then Mark, you can talk a bit about maybe where digital text might be going in the future, and then we'll try and do 5 minutes of questions at the end of that.
Sure. So we're, as I mentioned, we're working on sort of a copy editing tool, and I think the place that we've started coming at this from is thinking about what how people interact with text. So. I'm a programmer, and there's been a bit of a revolution in programming in the past sort of, say, 5 years. There's a site called GitHub, which you may or may not have heard of, but basically it's enabled collaboration sort of seamlessly across time and space, as it were, amongst programmers, and it's incredible. Like, it's really changed the way that we as an industry work, and I can't emphasize that enough. But it's completely inaccessible to ordinary people. It's built for programmers, and I think a lot of the friction that I see in the publishing industry, the tension really comes out of the tools just kind of suck. We as software developers we can build things that work great for us, and that's all fine and dandy until someone else tries to use it, and it's not really friendly. And I think we've seen a lot of interesting work come out of Apple and these sorts of companies to make things a lot simpler and easier to use, but also more powerful. And so we've been taking a step back and looking at how we can build collaboration tools that really work the way that writers and editors want to work and do work, but sort of bring in some of these the technological advances that have come in the last few years. So that sort of real-time collaboration. This panel is called Track Changes, and I think that strikes fear into the heart of probably most people. And so we're looking at ways to sort of enable that sort of collaborative process. These things are more and more online, and that process of emailing back and forth a document slowly over months just doesn't cut it when you're talking about these sort of fast turnarounds and whatnot. So we're one of several companies that have sort of come out recently that we're looking at our product in particular looks like editing paper. You've got a red pen and you mark up the document, but then you can iterate and change it, and it sort of evolves through the collaboration. We've tried to make it beautiful and really engaging, and really what we see is the writing process and the publishing process, we get caught up in all of these business things, but really, to speak to the communities that we're trying to engage, writing and reading is about joy. It's about this joyful communication and knowledge and people sharing. And ideally, the production process should feel like that too. And so that's really what we're trying to engender in what we're doing.
And I think what Blaine said was really important, and that is the collaboration and the tool set are critical. What Git does is again, for a programmer, is allows the collaboration to happen, but the user can use whatever tools they want to code in. And what we see with a lot of editorial is we see a lot of people hanging on to Microsoft Word. That's the environment, that's friendly. I know where all the buttons are.
For values of friendly.
But we've done some experiments, and we've tried to move that process online. We've tried to mimic it, because it's a first-generation technology. And we found that doesn't necessarily work all that well. We have a lot of resistance. Where we find it taking hold is in the latter stages of the process, late corrections. My interest is in the structure of the data, is if we can find a way to take great user experience tools that make it easy to edit while maintaining structure of the data such that we can remain agile to producing the material when we need it, whenever we need it during the process. And there's a handful of tools emerging out there, such as Poetica, that help us do that. And I think that's going to be the next generation of tools, is user-friendly tools that maintain structure within the data. That way we can have structure throughout and cycles that we need.
This all speaks to a larger point, which I was mentioning to Blaine earlier before we got on stage. There seems to be this group of people coming out of, I guess, generally the technology and the web space. They're people who love words, people who love writing, and people who love content in general, and they love publishing. But they're not coming from the publishing industry. They don't have the same preconceived notions that we have. They don't immediately default to, oh, crap, we've got to use Word, because that's what we've always used. They're like, let's apply the lessons that we've learned using version control tools such as GitHub, or Git rather, to the publishing process, and let's see what comes up with it. And I think that's really, really interesting, and it certainly bears, and I try to bring it up as much as I can at publishing conferences, because it certainly bears looking at and stepping outside of the comfort zone that is the publishing industry, and looking at what all these people are doing with the same, with the same end in sight. Just their journey is very different, and the tools that they're using are very different, and oftentimes much better. People like Blaine and Poetica and I guess the guys at Editorial and the guys at A Book Apart, like all these guys, they have nothing to do with the publishing industry. They don't know all of our inherent biases, and they work through that, and I think that's really interesting.
Okay. Well, I'd love it if we had a couple of questions, if anyone's burning to ask anything. I think we have some mics at the back. We do. Has anyone got a question for the panel? Oh, you're killing me. Come on. Oh, there we go, at the back.
Hi, we've been talking about the book as a unit. We're starting to talk a little bit about the chapter as a unit and the disruption that's happened to text to digital. How do you see that disruption continuing going forward?
Great question. Who wants to take it?
Do we need to call it destruction?
No, disruption.
Disruption. Oh, disruption. Disruption, sorry.
That's the first time I've heard the word today, I think. £5 to the man at the back. Chapters. So I guess you're talking about, content, granular content within books. How do we unpackage that? What does that mean for editorial? Does anyone want to speak to that?
I think it highly depends on the subject matter and on the genre.
Yeah.
I mean, I think obviously there's types of content that are much more conducive to it than others. Like I think Neil Gaiman mentioned the encyclopedia. That's gone. We've got the internet. But the literary novel perhaps is a little bit harder to chunk out. Within my own, experience, the contents of technology books is very appropriate for breaking into smaller chapters or chunks rather, and giving to the public in that respect. But I think it varies. I think
also I think there's I kind of find myself a little bit of a danger of people doing something like chunking and crazy things kind of for the sake of it to be doing it, when actually often you might have a very straightforward linear novel where actually that's just not really appropriate, in which case that's fine. The book gets published in that way because that's how it'll be best enjoyed. So I think a lot of it is exactly as you say, it's like a case-by-case assessing scenario, and I think what's important is definitely having those conversations when you're actually acquiring the book, so that the vision for the book follows through from commissioning stage.
And one thing to bear in mind is that a lot of the forms, the literary forms of the 20th century owe a lot to industrial production processes. For example, Darren, you'll probably know this, science fiction novels used to be much shorter, 50, 60,000 words, what we consider a novella these days. And
they were all serialized first in the pulp magazines.
Yeah, but still, if you take Foundation, I mean, that's not a very long work. Once they stopped being serialized and the publishers wanted to put them together as books, they started asking for longer and longer novels. So you start getting into 100, 150,000 words, et cetera, et cetera. Once you disintermediate from the physical container and you say there's really no need for this to be anything other than what it needs to be, that's super liberating from an editorial perspective, I think.
I do also think that there's a danger in starting with the answer and trying to enforce a question on it. I mean, we can now break text up into all these ways. That's fantastic. Now what do we do with it? That's kind of pointless. Whereas if we start with what do people need, and then move from that into the best way that we can answer it with the technology and processes available, I think we end up with something interesting and useful. But going the other way around is, going the other way around ends up with enhanced ebooks that nobody wants, that cost £10,000 to produce and have sold 6 copies because people are stuffing things in, saying, oh, we could do an author interview. What, you mean like the one that's on his website? Yeah, great. Or we could do a video, just like the one on YouTube. That's brilliant. So people will pay extra for that. It's just, it's putting the answer first, and that's the wrong way forward.
Okay, so we've got time for one more question. Gentleman at the front, can you say who you are and where you're from? I should have said that on the last one. Thanks.
Bob Bolick from British Standards Institution. Question for the panel. What other commissioning skills in-house, organizationally, do you find are changing because of digital, say in content management systems or semantic content management systems? What, as commissioning editors, do you see changing in your lives in the organization because of those digital changes?
I think certainly the collapse of the process chain requires the editor and the team to just have a wider view of what possibilities are there. We don't need them to necessarily be technology experts. We need them to be technology aware, such that, for example, with some technical work, and we just talked about chunking, understanding context of how that user is going to experience the content, and then where it's going to live within your data structures and the like, and then how it's going to be distributed. We don't need them to know exactly how to do it, but those options are available and the tool sets are there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, because certainly I'm editorial first and foremost. I'm not a technology expert, but I don't need to be. I need to know what's possible in that scenario. So I need to know, if I have this book and these are my ideas, which of those is actually achievable. So that kind of knowledge, and then I just leave it to the other very, very intelligent people to work out how we actually get there. But I think it's about having enough awareness to not be reaching for the stars and wasting a lot of time when that star is not actually attainable at this point. So just being having a realistic working knowledge.
I think there's a multitude of opportunities here. One of the things that I like to point out is that the fact that you can now publish everywhere. We heard the Clay Shirky quote earlier that you just publishing is a button. The fact is that today lots of people are writers who weren't before, and 30 years ago, if you were a writer, it meant you had a publisher and an editor, and if you didn't have those things, you were just kidding yourself, and that's simply not true anymore. There are plenty of writers who don't have those things, but those roles are still useful, and I think they'll become more useful And so being able to think outside of the sort of the traditional role of like that publishing process and everything, and being able to go out and meet writers where they are, and being able to engage in those places and be helpful in those environments. I think that's a massive advantage if you can think in those ways.
So one of my favorite people in publishing is Patrick Nielsen Hayden, one of the senior editors at Tor Books, and he told me once, you know, being an editor is nothing more than being an advocate for a piece of work, for a work or for an idea. I'm paraphrasing, but and this media literacy that you guys are describing fits right into that. You know, you have to be aware of everything that's going on out there. You may not be able to do it yourself, but you have to be aware that it's out there so that you can be a good, proper, you know, advocate for the idea, whether that idea lives, you know, in a serialized novel, or whether it lives in a finely print and bound codex, whether it lives as a movie, whether it lives as whatever, you know. Before moving into publishing, I spent about 6 or 7 years as an advertising art director, and that's exactly what that job was. It's not making pretty pictures, it's coming up with an idea and then being literate enough to understand how that idea then gets translated or disseminated through various different media, be it TV or radio or print or what have you, or online these days. And that, I think, is going to be, you know, a bigger and bigger part of the editorial process.
Who wants to read this, and how do I get it to them?
Yep.
Okay, great. I think that's us. It's lunchtime. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks, everyone.